now we're going to move on to the second half of Chapter 14, and we're going to be starting with the chemical digestion. All right, so we're going to be working through all 4 macromolecules. Remember, there are 4 macromolecules. You've got carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. So we're starting with carbohydrates. A complex carbohydrate would be your starches and your glycogens. Those are broken down by salivary amylase and pancreatic amylase to oligosaccharides and disaccharides. Then those are broken down by brush border enzymes into monosaccharides. Now, what is the concept here? In other words, when you eat your French fries, we can't use French fries anywhere in your body, but we can use monosaccharides. So we have to take those French fries and we use 3 different enzymes to break them down to their individual monomer or building block, which is the monosaccharide. Then we can use those in the body. Now, lactose intolerant. This is where you are lactase deficient, so you cannot digest lactose sugar. This prevents water absorption, which causes diarrhea, and the bacteria digest it to produce large amounts of gas. Now you can simply take the lactase enzyme with the meal to treat it, and you're good to go. Proteins. Protein, a normal big chunky protein like the steak you eat or hamburger you eat, is then broken down by pepsin into polypeptides. Polypeptides are broken down by trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidases, which are all enzymes, into peptides. Peptides are then broken down by brush border enzymes into the individual amino acids. Your lipids, here the triglyceride is the complex fat, and that is mechanically broken down by bile into emulsion or fat droplets. Then pancreatic lipase chemically digests those into the fatty acids and monoglycerides. Nucleic acids, your last macromolecule, are hydrolyzed by pancreatic nucleases to nucleotides. Then brush border enzymes break down nucleotides into their free bases, which are your adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine, pentose sugars, and phosphate. Alright, let's move on to absorption. Your monosaccharides, your amino acids, and your nucleic acids use active transport through the epithelial cells or diffuse directly into the blood capillaries. For fat, fat is done differently. Here, the absorption of the monoglycerides and fatty acids are going to be done into lymph. That makes them very unique. So what happens is they cluster with bile salts and lecithin to form these micelles. They're released by micelles to diffuse into the epithelial cells. They're combined with proteins to form chylomicrons. They enter the lacteals, which is the lymph, and are transported to the systemic circulation. Alright, so in this picture you can see the fat globule at the top. That mixes with bile salts, forms micelles, and then that enters through the epithelial cells into the lacteals. Vitamin absorption. In the small intestines, your fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, are carried by micelles, which remember are the fat, and then diffuse into absorptive cells. The water-soluble vitamins, C and B, are absorbed by diffusion or by passive or active transport. Vitamin B12, remember, has to bind with intrinsic factor back from the stomach and then is then absorbed by endocytosis. In the large intestines, vitamin K and B vitamins are coming from bacterial metabolism, meaning that you have to have the bacteria to be able to metabolize vitamin B and K. That's where these yogurts have come into when they talk about your digestive regularity. These are that bacteria that they're giving you in those yogurts to help with absorption of vitamins and breaking down foods. For your absorption of electrolytes, most are absorbed along the entire length of the small intestines. However, calcium and iron are limited to just the duodenum. For absorption of water, 9 liters enters per day. 95% of that water will be absorbed by the small intestines. And then what doesn't get absorbed, the large intestines, remember, their major function of the large intestines is to pull water out quickly before it leaves. Developmental imbalances. All right, you've got a cleft palate or lip. This interferes with feeding, so the child can't suck. We treat this with surgery. Now, cleft palates and lips. Back, 15 years ago, they used to tell us it was folic acid. The mother didn't take enough folic acid while she was pregnant, and so that was one of the problems. That is not true anymore because folic acid is in everything now. It's in milk, it's in juice, it's in everything. So you get it now whether you take a multivitamin while you're pregnant or not. So we're not seeing it being attributed to that. We don't know. For whatever reason, when the mouth was, or the palate was being formed, it didn't get the signal to completely seal. Now, it's not like it's one surgery that fixes this either. It's several surgeries. Typically, the children will start having surgeries about 1 year old, and they will continue till they're about 10 or 12 years old before they have their last surgery. Now, I can remember when I was a kid going to school with kids that had cleft lips and palates, and they had horrible scars. Now, most of your plastic surgeons will fix all those scars free of no charge or pro bono as a nice tax write-off for them, and it makes them feel better. So you don't see as many of those scars anymore. Now, tracheoesophageal fistula. This is the connection between the esophagus and trachea. That's bad. That has to be fixed immediately with surgery. Because what happens now, you swallow food, it goes down the esophagus, and now it slips over to the trachea and ends up in the lungs. Alright, so here you can see a cleft palate. In the upper left, you have a unilateral where only one side is affected versus the bilateral with both sides being affected. And here you can see the tracheoesophageal fistula, again where the esophagus and the trachea are connected. Developmental imbalances, cystic fibrosis. This primarily affects the lungs with excessive mucus, but also blocks, that excessive mucus blocks the pancreatic duct and prevents pancreatic fluid from reaching the small intestines. So here you would have to administer the pancreatic enzymes when you eat. Phenylketonuria. This is where tissues can't use the amino acid phenylalanine, which is found in protein. You require a special diet to prevent brain damage because these will accumulate in the brain and literally start eating it. Now, this is a genetic condition, and what we would see is that these babies would be born normal, but then they would start getting the phenylalanine through formula. And that means like even formula or breast milk. If mom was eating phenylalanines, then they were ending up in her breast milk. And by the time the infant was 3 or 4 months old, it was showing retardation. By a year old, it was fully retarded because these phenylalanines were eating the brain. Now we test for this genetically. Every child that is born in the United States is genetically tested within the first 5 minutes of birth for several things. This is one of those things so that we can cut it off before you end up with the brain damage. Nutrient is any substance promoting normal growth, maintenance, or repair. You've got carbs, proteins, lipids, vitamins are your organic source. Your inorganic source are your minerals. And then, of course, water. Metabolism is defined as all chemical reactions needed for life. You have 2 types, catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism is substances being broken down, and this is like releasing energy used to make ATP. So think catabolism, catastrophe, breaking down. Anabolism is the building of substances, like with protein synthesis. So every day, every moment of every day, you're metabolizing something. So like when you eat, we're going to go through catabolism first. We're going to break all that food down to the monomers or energy or whatever. Then you go through anabolism. You take those individual monomers and you build up what the body needs. All right, for carbs, your dietary sources, you've got starch, your complex carbohydrates in grains and vegetables. Your sugars are in fruits, sugar cane, sugar beets, honey, and milk. Insoluble fiber. This is cellulose found in vegetables. We do not have the enzymes to break down cellulose, so we call this roughage, and this is what acts as fiber and helps push the food through the GI tract. Soluble fiber is like pectin in apples and citrus fruits. This also helps reduce your blood cholesterol levels. So this is where you get that whole apple a day keeps the doctor away. Uses. Well, glucose is the fuel used by cells to make ATP. Neurons and red blood cells rely almost entirely upon glucose. And in fact, your neurons have to, it's ridiculous how much sugar the neurons use, and they will steal it from anywhere and everywhere in your body. Any excess glucose is then converted to glycogen, which is the complex form, or fat to be stored. So let's talk about carbohydrate metabolism. Here you take glucose, which is a blood sugar, and that's the major product of carb digestion. So when you eat, your carbs, we're going to break down into glucose, and then we're going to take glucose and we're going to make ATP, energy. There are 3 steps to carbohydrate metabolism, and this is also called cellular respiration. So it's the same thing. It's taking glucose and making ATP. First, you go through glycolysis, then you go through the Krebs cycle, and then you finally go through the electron transport chain. Now, these 3 processes occur either in the cytoplasm or the mitochondria, and for every 1 molecule of glucose, you end up with about 32 to 36 ATP. We're still, trying to figure out exactly how much, but that's a lot for only 1 molecule of glucose. So that's the major function of carbohydrates in your body, is to make energy. Lipids. How do we get those? Well, you got animal fats are your saturated. That comes from meat, dairy foods, and tropical oils. We'd like you not to eat saturated fats. Your plant fats are your unsaturated. That's your seeds, nuts, and vegetable oils. All right, cholesterol comes from egg yolks, milk, meat, and shellfish. And most people don't assume that, but yeah, your shellfish is high in cholesterol. Now, your essential fats like linolenic and linoleic acids are in vegetable oils. The liver can't synthesize these. They can't make them, so you have to eat them. And we get these through like omega-6 fatty acids. Now, what do we use fats for? Well, you need them for the absorption of the fat-soluble vitamins. We can use them as an energy source like the liver and skeletal muscle does, but we also use them for every cell membrane in your body, remember, is made of phospholipids. Adipose deposits are used for insulation, protecting, energy storage. Lipids are used to make prostaglandins, which are hormones. So yes, fats can be used as an energy source, but remember, if we're using them for energy, we're not using them for anything else, which means you're not replacing old broken down cells. You're not insulating your organs. You're not making those hormones, and you're not absorbing your fat-soluble vitamins. So you kind of want to be leery on that. Proteins. You have complete, which have all the required amino acids. Those are your eggs, milks, and your meats. Or incomplete, which lack some essential amino acids. These are like your legumes, your nuts and beans. Now, what do we use proteins in the body for? Well, structurally, there's keratin, the waterproofing protein in your skin. Collagen elastins found in all connective tissue. And that collagen is what helps you give you a youthful look. It keeps your skin nice and poofy. Without it, the skin wrinkles and sags. Now, functionally, every enzyme in your body is a protein. Hemoglobin that carries all your oxygen is a protein. Half of your hormones are protein-based. They suck as an energy source. For every 1 molecule of protein, you only get 2 ATP. That's not good. And remember, if you're using a protein for an energy, then you're not doing anything else. You're not making new hemoglobin. You're not making enzymes. You're not making hormones. You're not doing any of that. Now, all amino acids needed to make a protein have to be available and enough ATP to make the protein, or you don't make it at all. That's an all or none principle. All right, fat metabolism. Fats are oxidized, producing ATP. Fat breakdown products are used for myelin sheaths, cholesterol, cell membranes. But again, you can either use it for energy or you can use it for the myelin sheaths and all the other stuff. Protein metabolism, these are broken down to amino acids. You have deamination. That's where the liver removes the nitrogen from the proteins, and we excrete that as urea. Now, carefully conserved due to role in protein synthesis. Okay, your essential amino acids are only obtained through diet, so we want to save those to make the proteins needed in your body. Again, we only want to use protein to make ATP if you have enough. Now, this is where we want to kind of talk about low carb, no carb diets. Okay, these are not good for your body long term. They're okay if you're going to be on it for a couple of weeks and then get back off of it and get back to normal eating. And unfortunately, that's not the way most people use these diets. They use them for months at a time, and then they get off of them. They go right back to their horrible eating habits, put all the weight back on, and then they jump back on the diet again, and it becomes a cyclical event. All right, this is absolutely horrible for your body, okay? Because first of all, you're not eating carbs, so you have no energy source for your body. That leaves you to have to use fats, okay? Now, with these diets, they tell you you can eat as much fat and protein as you want, but little to no carbs, okay? So now you're going to have to use your fat as your energy source. First of all, it takes forever to break down fat to get energy. You know, it's not as quick as with sugar, so it takes longer to do it, so you're going to be tired a lot more. And secondly, you're not going to be replacing any of those worn out cells. You're not going to be making cholesterol. You're not making myelin sheaths to protect the brain. These are big deals. So remember, you're sloughing off skin every day. You don't get to make new skin cells because you don't have any phospholipids to make them. So you get that crusty, nasty looking skin still. You got to keep it because that's all you got. You know, and then you've got the lipid-based hormones that you're not going to be making anymore either. So try to keep that in mind. Now, what's worse is the proteins. Okay, now you're going to have to start using proteins as an energy source, which means that you're no longer making enzymes, you're no longer making hormones, you're not making hemoglobin anymore, you're not, this gets bad quickly. Now, here's another thing you got to think about. With both fat and protein breakdown, when we metabolize them, we give off something called ketones. Okay? Ketones get into the bloodstream and make it acidic. This is a huge problem. And now, these low carb, no carb diets, they want you in ketosis, which is an imbalance where your blood is becoming acidic. That means that to them, they go, oh, if you're in ketosis, you're doing great. That means you're using your stored fat. Well, you are. They're right. But you're not thinking about the other side of ketosis, which is that your blood is becoming acidic and your brain no longer has sugar. It has ketones to use as energy, which sucks. So that means that literally parts of your brain will have to stop functioning. They have to turn off, and you have to, it's kind of like if you're in a war. You have to go in there and you go, okay, what do we absolutely need to run today? And that's how your brain works. Well, unfortunately, not all those closed areas of the brain turn back on. So we've seen people that have been on these diets long term have major brain damage, memory shortage, they're in kidney failure from the ketones. This is a very bad idea done in the wrong way. All right, liver metabolism. Well, the liver maintains your blood sugar levels, your blood glucose levels. You have glycogenesis. All right, genesis means to make, and it's got the word glycogen in it. So this is where you're taking glucose and you're storing it as glycogen. Well, why do we do that? Well, because glucose cannot just float around because the cells will use it to make energy. Well, then what happens, 3 hours after you've eaten and your blood sugar is dropping? Well, you're screwed, right? Well, no. That's why when you eat, we take some of the sugar that you eat and we store it as a complex sugar called glycogen. And your liver stores that and some of your muscle stores that. So, 3 or 4 hours after you're eating, when you're crashing, you can go back to the liver and go through something called glycogenolysis. Remember, lysis means to split or rupture. This is where you're going back to the liver and you're taking that glycogen that you stored earlier and breaking it back down to glucose to release into the bloodstream. Now, gluconeogenesis, this is the where the liver makes new glucose from a non-carbohydrate source, from like fats or proteins. And again, you get the product of ketones. Cholesterol. Alright, this is a lipid needed for cell membranes and all your steroids, which is all your estrogen, your testosterone, all that. Now, it's transported in the body by lipoproteins. Now, you have two big categories. LDL, low density lipoproteins. These will transport fats being deposited in body tissues. They stick to the artery walls, forming plaque, which leads to atherosclerosis, which is the narrowing, narrowing of the artery, filling up with plaque. That leads to, blockages, heart attacks. Oh, just bad. HDLs are what we call your good cholesterol. They reverse the effects of your LDLs. They go back and pick up all those fats out of the arteries, take them back to the liver to be broken down and excreted into bile. Alright, body energy balance. We'd like energy intake, which is the energy liberated during food breakdown, to equal energy output, which is released as heat. If the two equal each other, weight gained or lost is done when the two do not equal each other. BMR, basal metabolic rate. Alright, this is the energy a person needs to sustain essential life functions. So this is the energy you need to just live, to breathe, for your heart to beat, your kidneys to function. That's it. Not you getting up off the sofa and doing something. No, this is just you living. A kilocalorie is how we measure energy in food. There are 9 kilocalories per gram in fats, where you have 4 kilocalories per gram in your carbs. Just kind of give you an example. Now, the average 154-pound adult has a BMR of 60 to 72 kilocalories an hour, meaning that that's what you need to have available just to be able to, for your heart to beat and breathe and all that good stuff. Now, what are some factors that affect your BMR? Well, your surface area, your gender, your age, your thyroxine levels. Higher levels result in higher oxygen consumption and ATP use, which increases your metabolic rate. Hyperthyroidism, here you get weight loss because the body catabolizes stored fats. Hypothyroidism ends up with obesity because metabolism is so slow. Total metabolic rate is the total amount of kilocalories the body must consume for ongoing activities. So this is you getting up off the sofa and, going to do anything. Anything beyond just existing. Like muscular work dramatically increases your total metabolic rate. So weight gained or lost is when the calories don't equal your total metabolic rate. Alright, food intake control. Well, there's lots of factors. There's nutrients, hormones. A portion of it is psychological. Some of you eat when you're stressed. Some of you don't eat when you're stressed. And, of course, body temperature. Increased temperature inhibits the want for food. Now, body temperature. Most of the energy released when foods are broken down is in heat. And the hypothalamus is your body thermostat. This will help regulate your body temperatures. Now, heat promoting mechanisms. When you're cold, heat has to be conserved. The biggest concern is your core, where all your major organs are. So your body will go through something called vasoconstriction. This is where the arteries constrict and blood is kept deeper near the vital organs and skips the skin. That's why you rub your arms when you're cold. You're trying to bring the blood back to the surface. Now, shivering are muscle contractions that generate heat when you're cold. Heat loss mechanisms. This is when the body becomes too hot. You have radiation. That's the vasodilation, brings warm blood to the capillary beds in the skin, and the heat radiates out of the body. Evaporation. Here is where the perspiration on the skin releases heat as it evaporates. Now, that does not work very well in humidity. Okay, so let's talk about what that is. Since we're in Florida, we got a lot of humidity. Humidity is the amount of water in the air. Okay, the way perspiration works is it's sweat on your skin. The air wants that water, and so it will absorb it off of your skin, thus releasing the heat. However, in areas like ours, where there's 100% humidity, when we sweat, the air already has water. It doesn't want our water. So the sweat actually stays on you and causes you into heat strokes and all kind of bad problems. So that's why they tell you if you work outside to have a cloth so that you can wipe your own sweat away. What about imbalances if you're too cold or too hot? Too cold will lead to frostbite because remember the vasoconstriction. The cells die due to lack of oxygen and nutrients and can form ice crystals. Hypothermia is where the temperature gets too cold for too long to maintain metabolic reaction, so you ultimately end up dying that way. Too hot, you have hyperthermia. That's a positive feedback system here. Higher temperatures increase the metabolic reactions, which further increases the temperature and can lead to heat stroke causing brain damage. Heat exhaustion is where you collapse during physical activity due to the excessive heat, dehydration, low blood pressure. It's a safety mechanism trying to prevent heat stroke. Now, the process used by the liver to break down glycogen in order to raise glucose blood levels is called A, glycolysis, B, glycogenolysis, C, gluconeogenesis, or glycogenesis. Okay, the answer is B, glycogenolysis. Now, which of the following nutrients are broken down by the mitochondria to generate ATP? A, proteins, B, carbohydrates, C, lipids, or D, nucleic acids. Nucleic acids, sorry. And the answer is B, carbohydrates. And this concludes our chapter.